Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's Fake Accents Unite. I am joined, as always, by the ever-present Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And this week with our special guest, Shinobi Yaka. Good evening.
Good evening.
Another fake accent. So obviously someone from Southern Australia who's claiming to be Welsh.
Yeah. Claiming to be Welsh. I mean, you've got a very thick accent, to be honest.
Yeah, when you say thick.
I tell you, yeah, it's oxymoronic, the fact that you produce intelligent content.
Well, no, I was just saying before, it was fairly obvious why people were clamoring. Why hasn't the stream begun yet? And it's nothing to do with us, not so obvious. It's the fact that Shinobi Yaka, the recent winner of the Cyberpass quiz, is amongst us, and that obviously on hearing that they basically couldn't contain themselves.
So desperate were they to hear the dulcet, silky tones of Yaka Shinobi.
Yes. I did have the fourth biscuit. I got to mention this.
Oh, of course. Is this you keep a running biscuit count every day just to irritate AA?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Britisher, I will mention that at the beginning of this, I said to the chat, I'm going to be about 15 minutes, ladies and gents. I won't mention why, but his name rhymes with Critisher.
Yes, it's entirely my doing. Yes, but I say it's entirely my doing. It's of course entirely your fault.
It's my fault.
Yes, for hosting this chat at ridiculous times, such as 8 o'clock.
We agreed 8 o'clock 7 months ago.
No.
You've been running this.
No, I'm sorry. You announced 8 o'clock 7 months ago.
Oh, I see.
I have ever since been struggling to actually hit the time every single time.
We could move the time. You are friends with me. You can message me and go, do you know what? 8:30 is a much better time to do this.
So okay, we'll see each other again in 2.5 hours. See you then. Bye.
2.5. Yeah, the Britisher needs his nap and a jar wax for some reason. Oh God! It's chat says it's never been on time. It wouldn't be fake accents if it was. So there you go. You're contributing to the great British pastime of being fashionably late.
Talking about fake accents, of course, you know, I had the great sort of Tommy Robinson supporter revolt as per usual. Every time I bring up Tommy Robinson in the week that was, it happens.
Okay.
And I once again get people on who then immediately tell me that they have been loyal subscribers to mine, but are leaving now because I criticized their demigod. The funny thing, of course, was that in this particular video, I didn't even criticize him. I said that I didn't think he had done anything wrong. Obviously, I hadn't been sufficiently sort of,
not zealous enough
in my support, and I had even dared say that perhaps certain aspects of his I disagree with, and therefore immediately the avalanche was launched, if you know what I mean.
So what was the main contention then, and what upset people about that video?
Well, I touched upon the soldiers, the story of the soldiers meeting him at the Watford Gap service station.
I watched the video, so I know what you said.
And I basically said, I don't necessarily agree with everything Tommy Robinson does, but I don't really think he made any mistake. And of course, they immediately zeroed in on I don't necessarily agree with everything Tommy Robinson does.
Right.
Therefore, I am immediately the enemy of the people. And one of the things, funnily enough, one suddenly starts questioning is whether I am British enough.
Hey?
This says that the man in the Flashman attire with the great bloody Union Jack behind him and the pith helmet.
Is the Pope Catholic enough? That's the issue.
Exactly. So of course I am. This is entirely a pretense. One of them believed to discover a German accent in me. Another one, and this is why I came onto this. Another one swore I was Welsh.
Shinobi, does he sound Welsh?
Absolutely not. I tell you who is Welsh is AA.
Yeah, but he doesn't sound that Welsh.
Yeah, there's certain words he says that yeah, definitely Welsh.
Something,
but it's sort of
well, yes, but can he sing my Delilah?
No, but he can't. And he can't.
Probably doesn't know what it is, Britisher, to be honest. He's from He's from the posh part of Wales.
What is the posh part of Wales?
And anywhere east
Is
of
that sort of the middle bit?
Yeah, he's more from the Vale, the southern end.
What was that thing regarding Wales? It must have been a couple months ago now, where someone made a joke about a certain bridge connecting Wales to the first world.
Yes. They renamed the bridge. It was the second Severn crossing, and they renamed it the Prince of Wales Bridge, something like that.
Okay.
Wasn't that actually a sort of a fairly well-known columnist?
Yes.
His name has completely escaped me right now, but I'm sure the chat will know.
I know the guy's name. He is.
Yes, I can even see. I can imagine in my mind's eye. I can see his face in front of me. I just cannot pin a name to it.
But it was tongue in cheek because the guy started his career in. I think he worked for Cardiff.
Chat saying Rod Liddle.
Yes, that's the guy. Yeah. Well, he started his career as a reporter in Cardiff, so he's quite familiar with Wales. And I think when he did the article, he went over the top. It was a piss take. To be honest.
I mean, with your being Welsh, and obviously in comparison to AA, you're being proper Welsh. Yeah. If I could sort of direct your attention to the side chat there of ours.
I don't normally watch the chat.
No, not the chat.
No, the chat.
In our internal chat, we've got a sort of sidebar.
Oh, God. Clanfair. I can't get past that bit. There you go.
Yes. Can you actually pronounce that?
Let's have a look at it.
A village on the island of Anglesey. The place with
Pilgrishley. No, I can't even attempt that one.
And that's, of course, then you've got sort of the long version of it, which sort of ends in gogogoch.
Yeah. Well, the double L is flan.
Yeah.
Fair. Pilgrish. No, that Pilgrini. But it's the ending bit that I wouldn't pronounce. No, can't pronounce.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. It's official. This is not a proper Welshman.
The Welsh can't call it. They just call it that place over the road. I do like, however, Britisher, that I'm doing a foreign accent voice is the same for every single accent that you do. It's like it doesn't matter. It becomes very sort of staccato.
I have absolutely no idea of what you're talking about.
So you're doing it now.
I have no idea of what you speak.
No, sure.
I cannot recall ever having tried putting on a foreign accent online.
It wouldn't possibly cross your mind ever.
No. I mean, why would I do such a thing?
No, not when your current dulcet tones provide.
I mean, it would only occur if I would be suffering a severe trauma, a sort of severe mental trauma at the time.
Jelly Gotti in chat, which I'm clearly butchering that pronunciation as well, says Welsh is a fake language designed solely to confuse the English.
Well, I must admit there is some truth to Welsh being a fake language because, a great many words don't exist in Welsh because Welsh being such an ancient language and not really having been a living language for a long time. When one then tried to kind of hoik it back. When one then tried to hoik it back into existence, one ended up with, what do we call mini golf?
Hang on a minute.
Let's just flip it and call it golf mini.
Right.
Here we go.
Where does one start? No, I'm not a Welsh language enthusiast. But the claim it's not a living language would be a bit of a mischaracterization. The thing is with the Welsh language, it's highly Latinized. For instance, there is no Welsh for window. It's fenestra, which is from the Latin. Fenestra is Latin for window.
Either that or, of course, it's French, fenêtre.
Well, yeah, I mean, French is a Latinized language.
What was that, Britisher?
There you go, not so obvious. They're actually closet Frenchmen.
Well, Welsh and Content points out that English is 60% French origin.
Well, English assimilates a lot of words, as did Welsh in the early day. But I get your point that I researched computer components, for instance, and the what's the French for CD drive, do you think?
CD.
I would strongly suspect that in actual everyday use, it is CD drive.
It is. It's the same as German and Spanish and Italian, CD drive. Now, the Welsh have a word, it's about something like 12 characters long, and I can't pronounce that one either. There's a committee in Cardiff, and what they do is they look at, they find this is absolutely true.
Language by committee, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and they said, well, we'll have to have a
But
Welsh
it's a living
word for
language.
this. And they just make
it's a living language. They need a committee to decide it, but it's a living language.
Yeah, they just make these things up. And
I still haven't worked out what the French word for crepe is.
Crepe. Like that. Oh, that was very droll.
Oh, very droll.
It was like what Donald said that. No, it was Bush, wasn't it? George Bush. He said the French haven't got a word for entrepreneur.
That was right. Yeah. Oh, George Bush and his double entendres.
Oh, another bit of French slipping in there. Yeah.
Don't know what you're talking about, mate. Not a clue.
Yeah, the interesting thing about there's interesting point about the Welsh language is when they were building the valleys for the mines.
They built valleys.
Kept getting lost. If they were called a street, then it was named in Welsh. They couldn't find a street, so they had to rename all the streets in English, like St. George Street and King Elizabeth Street and whatever. You know, they just changed it. They anglicised all the words so that the GPs could find their way around the valleys, which is quite important.
Did you just say the Welsh made the valleys?
Built the valleys, I think.
They built the valleys?
Yes.
They carved them out themselves?
No. The Welsh valleys are glacial. But
I was starting to think that the Welsh were much more productive than I'd given them previous credit for.
To all fairness, I believe they did kind of top up a mountain, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, I've seen that film. It's a true story, apparently.
Yes, yeah, apparently that is a true tale. That basically, in order to, for those listening and don't know what we mean, in order to kind of qualify as a mountain, you needed to have a certain minimum height. Otherwise, you were just a hill. And there was this village that was pretty much stuck next to the first mountain in Wales. And there being a mountain, it meant that they got quite a bit of tourism. But once the guy came, the cartographer, to kind of come and measure this, he actually found out that they were actually something like 10 feet short of actually being a mountain. So the people actually started carrying up stones to the top of the hill, you know, what is now a hill officially, and started piling that up. In kind of like a dry stone wall format, if you know what I mean, to kind of make an artificial peak. And then they persuaded him to measure again, but now from that new peak, which meant they were then still officially a mountain.
It's about as officially a mountain as there are pyramids in Bosnia.
Yeah, I think the film was called The Man Who Went Up a Hill and Came Down a Mountain.
Yes, precisely, yes. Yeah, indeed.
And it was Chief O'Brien from Star Trek, I think, played the publican in the village.
Not being a Star Trek aficionado, I wouldn't really know.
Oh, you poor man.
But it was Hugh Grant who played the man who was doing the measuring.
That's the one, yeah, he did. It's quite a funny film, actually. But
well, because in the film they try everything in order to delay him, because he is about to leave, having measured and discovered it's not a mountain. So obviously, whilst they are kind of preparing something, they need to make sure that this man can't leave the village, because otherwise they're doomed.
Let me have a look at this. Someone's just said in chat there's something going on with Zwarte Piet. At the moment.
What?
Zwarte Piet.
Him, her, it.
Who are we talking about?
So, Zwarte Piet, which is like a character or a caricature, I suppose. It's like a
Is that something like Black Peter?
Yeah, Black Peter is it's a black character, but it's a white person, typically painted black, like completely ebony, and it's like a clown. And it's been some controversy recently, but apparently there's been something on.
Oh, this is some blacking up story again, is it?
I have no idea. I'm just having a look, talking
It's
about.
always a controversy, isn't it? And you think, how ridiculous is anything going to get? It really is.
I can't see anything.
Svarte Piet is a companion of Saint Nicholas.
Ah, yes, that was right.
So yeah, I mean, on the continent, yes, they have a. How should we say? They have a somewhat different sort of mythology surrounding Santa Claus. Most of them have some figure. These figures can take all sorts of shapes and sizes and colors.
Look only at Krampus.
Most of them have some kind of companion to Santa Claus. And the idea effectively is that Santa Claus arrives with the book, and in the book he's got the list of all the good children and the bad children. And effectively, the good children get the presents. So imagine one arrives with big bags, big bag full of presents and fruits and nuts and whatever, and one tips out the bag. Now one has got one empty jute sack. Well, that's where the bad children go in.
Oh, yes.
Which are then carried off by the companion of Santa Claus.
Well, that's great, isn't it? It's like a recycling scheme, isn't it? You get a good kid back.
So you basically come with the bag. That's where the goodies are in. The goodies get tipped out, and then you stick the bad children in the bag, and off they go.
To be made into presents for next year.
Because Santa Claus is the nice guy. It therefore, it's kind of good cop, bad cop routine. So you have got some kind of dark, menacing, sinister character, and that is the one that basically then throws the bag over his shoulders and walks off with Santa Claus.
I tell you, it's truly impressive how many toy trains you can make out of bone. So there you go.
Well, it's like a good scheme, actually.
Well, particularly, I mean, you just need to look at, as I say, the character of the Krampus was not a character you wanted to be visited by in any way, shape, or form.
Well, if you read like the fairy tales, I mean, some of them are quite grim, if you excuse the pun. Some of the things that they portray in the fairy tales are quite dodgy.
Well, you have a look at kind of dark edge to them, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And kids like that.
Well, partially because they were actually designed to teach kids to fear certain things.
Look at things today. I mean, we've got a festival coming up. I mean, I always insist it's an American one. Could the British please remember that? Halloween, or however you wish to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Look at the dark side of that, and look how the kids love it.
Yeah, it is based on a pagan festival, isn't it? Halloween.
Yes, and I remember during the Bush years, there were. I don't know whether these things still happen, but particularly during the Bush years, when you had that kind of very sort of strong position of the religious right, they would actually put on sort of alternative Halloween festivals that were not Halloween, in which kids would have to dress up as something nice. They couldn't be ghouls or ghosts or Frankensteins or vampires,
But they don't want to dress up as something nice, do they? They want to dress up as something horrible.
I mean, as far as I was aware, it was based primarily off just the idea of All Hallows Eve, and that it was the last day that evil spirits could come out and play, because the next day they would all get sort of either eviscerated or sent back down to hell, depending on which tradition you were going on.
There's also the Walpurgisnacht, isn't there? Where all the witches and whatever are supposed to come out to play. So I'm not sure I'm not sure to what extent it's related to that. It may well be a mix of a bit of everything. What I do remember, though, I mean, somebody might want to research this on YouTube, because you can pretty much find everything on YouTube, as we know these days. I believe in a bit of Fry and Laurie, or it could have just been one of the other series that Fry and Laurie did, there is a sketch in which some kids turn up for Halloween and literally get booted out by Fry and Laurie, who both shout after them that it's a bloody American festival. So please clear off.
That's very accurate. I was talking to Shinobi about this pre-stream, but I have a funny article for you today. Perhaps you could read the title for me, Britisher. You'll enjoy this one, because I know
I'm
you're
staring into infinity again here.
I know what your feelings are on white people.
Oh well, yes, of course. I mean, this is all goodness. What else could one possibly call it? It's okay to be white. Bill defeated in Australian Senate.
Now, which is worse? And it's okay to be anything, Bill, or an upskirting bill in terms of wasting people's time. Like, that's not to say that this doesn't have merits, but less interesting than the contents of the bill is the outcome of what the bill seemed to represent.
Well, I mean, I saw a clip by Grim Jim earlier today, who basically just said, "Yeah, this is a trap." That basically somebody had laid a trap and they had walked right into it. Because they just seemed, they're too keen to kind of be taking the stance of, oh, this is dog whistling, these are white supremacists, this is that. No, we can never possibly accept that. And therefore they simply, they're blind to the fact that actually the statement in itself is perfectly innocent. And to anybody, to any voter in Australia that basically gets the headline and sees that, he sort of says, well, if you're a politician, ask yourself, what is your general public going to think? And yes, this is not really very good. This is not very good tactical political behavior.
No.
In a way, I think it was put forward by two conservatives who clearly had in mind basically dig them a big pit to fall into, and lo and behold, they've done it. Yeah.
I think the annoying thing is it's not. I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, it's okay to be white. It's a bit of nonsense, isn't it? But what I would like is for an even playing field. If you can't say certain things about people of color.
Yeah, it wasn't just of whether it was okay to be white. I think there were 2 points. One is it is okay to be white, which was kind of the afterthought, I believe, in the bill. Right. The other one was kind of a condemnation of racism toward white people.
So here we are. It's a motion that condemns anti-white racism, and it lost by 3 votes, which is just the fact that it lost at all. Again, I suppose a part of it is they then have to admit that it exists.
Yes.
It exists. They've got Twitter. They can see it, can't they?
Well, it can be problematic, because then they have to be the one nation on earth that determines that racism can come from any source.
It's also the fact that the fact that other racism is acknowledged is always put forward by them as the need to do something. So therefore, if one were now to acknowledge that anti-white racism exists, one thereby would also, by one's own logic, kind of have to follow through with, in that case, we need to do something.
But the thing is, I mean, on Twitter, you've got that, I think last Christmas, the professor from the US said it's all he wanted for Christmas is white genocide.
Yeah.
That was horrendous.
Yes. And he was serious.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Now, if that's not racist, I don't know what is. But apparently you can't be racist against white people.
So he still retains check mark, right?
No. It's absolutely.
Well, you remember there was a Twitter account called Verified Hate. It wasn't called Verified Hate. I can't remember what it was called, but they used the hashtag Verified Hate, and it was basically trawling through Twitter through all the verified check marks and putting up images, like screen caps, of all the tweets of hatred and racism and so on made by verified check marks. That were very left wing and therefore deemed okay by Twitter's and algorithms. And that account got banned. It never posted anything of its own. It would only ever screen cap and make a record of these hate comments
Well,
and
one of
then
the-
try and point them out to Twitter. And Twitter,
Yeah, one of the best ones in that respect I ever heard was a channel that put up speeches by imams in mosques, but with English subtitles.
okay.
So basically, it took the speeches from other channels, but now it had translated them into English and put them up. And that then, I think, got removed for hate speech.
Oh, funny that. Oh dear.
Yeah, there's a website that's that. Is it Marmy? MERMI?
Emmy, what?
MERMY? Or I, sorry. Marmy something or other? No,
You're saying this with a questioning tone. I think
Yeah,
the
I'm not
answer
sure the
is
exact
neither of us
spelling.
know.
No, try MEMI. MEMI.
Emmy.
Let's see if I can find it.
Makeup. You have a look and see if you can see it.
Yeah, I'll have a look, see if I can find it. And they do a similar sort of thing. They do the Arabic translations, and that's quite an eye opener.
Memory TV says no. Oh, it's memory. I don't know.
Right.
One sec. So
I'm just seeing here because of what you said. It says here Dutch Christmas character Black Pete, so Zwarte Piet, to shed blackface for TV. The Dutch public broadcaster has announced that it will change the appearance of the traditional, it's funny, isn't it? Traditional seems to be being lost here. The traditional Christmas season character, Black Pete, whose blackface outfit sparks annual controversy. So it's traditional, but we're now going to change the tradition.
No, I've just posted
some people don't like it.
In the side box there.
Not Black Pete. Let me have a look at the.
Yeah, it was MERMR.
Yeah. Memory. Middle East Media Research Institute. There we go. Okay. Right. Okay. Present to everyone. There we go. Into Infinity. Yeah. I see. Okay. So these are all.
Yeah, they're all translated. They monitor the Egyptian and the Saudi television channels, and then they provide a translation service. And it's quite an eye opener because this is the Muslims talking to themselves.
Yeah, so unimpeded, as it were.
Yeah, and it's quite an eye opener.
Pretty brutal. Justifies sexual harassment of women dressed immodestly. Disgusting. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I mean, I was making myself quite angry the other day because it's fun. And watching the worst of Islamic apologists. And there's some phenomenal stuff in it, particularly some of the stuff when Christopher Hitchens was alive, and that sort of thing. So, and he was just like this woman from Iran, basically saying, "When I go to Iran, I sit there and talk like this." And he was like, "No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't do that in Iran." And then like loads of people were commenting from Iran going, "Yeah, if she did that and spoke the way that she did, she'd be dead, or at least in prison for the way she behaved and the way she dressed." So it's interesting to say the least.
Yes, well, we all await avidly the first Iranian or Tehran slut walk.
Yes. What was it? Also something hilarious is seeing journalists go out to the slut walk and go up to them and going, "How do you think this is combating sexual harassment?" And of course they can't respond. They have no idea. Like no one would dare sexually harass them on that day for wearing effectively nothing. Yeah. That's about it. Like there's nothing. It doesn't help women worldwide. It doesn't raise money. It doesn't do anything except allow some women to walk scantily clad down the street for a bit. So it's bizarre. But you can see the look on their face as they go, "It's in solidarity." And you just go, well, it doesn't do anything.
It's all right.
Do anything. And the women you're claiming to be in solidarity for think you're either insane or don't care or are completely unaffected by this.
Yeah, I don't see what the point is. And it's like British has said. I mean, Slut Walk, or for instance, the first Tehran Gay Pride March.
Yes, indeed. But
why don't they campaign? I mean, all these feminists in the West.
Oh, yes, there's so many. It's like when you go, who was it? I can't remember who it was who was saying.
I mean, that might be one of the things worth doing. You know, these people who do these stunts where they go up to people at American universities and ask them questions.
Yes,
it might be worth their going up to some feminists and asking them, you know, whether they could name a single one of the feminist campaigners in Saudi Arabia that have recently been locked up under during the clampdown, once women had been given the right to drive.
Yes, so I think I saw Stephen Crowder do one of his "Change My Mind" segments, which are a bit of a meme at this point, but they're actually, some of them are good conversations, and one of them, once he'd managed to convince this person that there wasn't a rape culture in this country, went off on one about how there was a rape culture in certain other countries. And then he was like, okay, so go campaign there against rape culture instead of here, because here there isn't one. It was just like, she got very angry and then cried and then ran off, which seemed to be a running theme. There you go. Oh, the Liberal Zardos has pointed out the fashion shows in Saudi Arabia, no female models allowed. So they had their first female fashion show, and they flew the dresses around on drones. Looks like a low budget ghost.
That was quite bizarre, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
It was very strange, very strange. But back to Australia just for a moment, because that's what's going on here. So Pauline Hanson, the leader of the far right, now whether or not it is far right or whether or not it's just right wing,
it's conservative. She's
the One Nation Party wanted backing for a motion which stated it is okay to be white. And also spoke of the deplorable rise of anti-white racism and attacks on Western civilization. Critics dismissed it as a stunt. Who last year? Oh, she's the one who wore the burqa into Parliament.
Yeah.
There she is. In a full niqab by the looks of things. And then she called for it all to be banned, as far as I'm aware. If this even loads. So she's basically coming in and then talking about how
that was a bit like Superwoman, wasn't it?
She expects her to just spin around to lose the cape, but
she had a row for that, didn't she? She got sanctioned for that.
Draw audible shock. Imagine their shock. And in her emotional speech, said risked alienating approximately 500,000 Australians who adhered to Islam. Why? It's like it's not ridiculing the community; it's ridiculing a practice. It's like your community is not that practice. But this again on this.
It's funny how calling for a ban on something, because effectively that's what she's doing when she's talking about the burqa that way. It's funny how doing that is risking alienating people. But when you then want to get rid of Zwarte Piet, that doesn't risk alienating anybody.
Look, them and Morris dancers aren't people, right? So
true. But particularly the worst Morris dancers are, of course, those who black up.
Yes,
that lot.
Oh yeah, because I used to have them all around where I lived. It was a local thing, like traditional Morris dancing. It's what the South has.
Go down the pub, isn't it? To be honest,
basically, and to smack each other with sticks. That's the general gist of it. But also, there's this. So, among the 23 people who voted in favour was a Black African, Kenyan-born Lucy Gichui of the governing coalition, etc. So that's nice. I suppose, like they're going, it's dramatic. a black person voted to say it was okay to be white, and others who supported blah blah blah. People have a right to be proud of their cultural background, whether they're black, white, or brindle. Now, I'm going to betray my ignorance here. I have absolutely no idea what brindle is.
It's brown and black.
I assume. And you go, if we cannot agree on this, I think this statement's a little bit disingenuous. I think that there's certainly a tendency amongst the. I mean, we already talked about the fact that if they say it's okay to be white and we condemn anti-white racism, they have to admit anti-white racism exists, and then they have to do something about it, because they've admitted there might be a problem if this happens.
They just got to apply the even rules. If it's not okay to say anything about a person of color, then it equally applies to people who are not people of color. That's all they need to do, is just apply a level playing field.
Oh, Yaka, we're all people of color.
We are actually. We're all the same color. So who the changes?
Imagine that needs to be a statement. We're all people of color.
We're all Africans, yeah.
No, not even that, because apparently that was all bunk, wasn't it? It ended up being somewhere in northeastern Europe as well, or something like that.
It was a bit dubious, yeah.
If we can't agree on this, blah blah blah. It's a headline-grabbing stunt. Yes, that it is. Doesn't mean it's not true. And he said Mrs. Hanson was in a race. Do you get it?
Yeah.
With another of her colleagues to the bottom of the sewer by seeing who can be the biggest, the loudest, most racist bigot by saying it's okay to be white. Oh dear.
I often wonder if they listen to themselves. When you come up with a statement to that, do they actually realise what they're saying?
Yeah, you must. They're like this whole guilt by association thing, and the fact that the right wing and the far right, because it has to be said that the far right has taken it's okay to be white and put it places, because they go, oh yeah, it is okay to be white, but there's nothing wrong with them saying that. I mean, the context in which they say it there's nothing harmful about the statement. It doesn't make any claims that it's more okay to be white than it is to be black. It's just right. It's okay to be white. And the idea that the left in particular, or politicians in particular, can't just take it and say what it is and tell people who misconstrue it as like a bigoted statement to basically go evaluate with an English dictionary. Need to, the fact they can't take this on. They can't just say there is nothing wrong with this statement, and if you see something wrong with this statement, there's something wrong with you, which is what the right is doing to them right now. Just typically.
Yeah, I'm not sure of who's more racist at the moment, whether it's the right, the extreme right, or the extreme left. They seem to be in a bit of a competition, don't they?
They are. I mean, the left in general seem to be like, the difference at the moment is, I guess, that the racist part of the right haven't got the power, whereas the left, because they're kind of soft, quote unquote soft racism, is sort of, it's pernicious, it's presented in a different way, and it's sort of seen as socially okay. It sort of saturates the media and positions of power at the moment.
Well, I think there is also a difference between the racism of the far right is kind of overt, knowing racism, whereas the racism of the left or the far left, whichever way you define this, seems to be kind of unwitting racism.
Oh, they don't realize.
They're kind of blatantly racist, but they don't themselves realize it. And if you confront them, they completely and utterly deny it, if you know what I mean. They do not realize what they're actually doing.
Wasn't there this thing where, like, because again, there's this thing where the left in particular pushes this idea that it goes one way, and it can only go one way, which is prejudice. It's like oppression, or prejudice plus power is racism. And if you don't have the power, you don't have the racism. They don't realize that they have the power as such, because they're the idea that in a truly racist society, you would even be allowed a platform to speak at all. is ludicrous, because you get this idea. I mean, if you have a look at when, say, the slaves were freed in America or even in Britain, it's they didn't immediately go into like the mayor of the town didn't immediately open up to black people. The society was still based around the hugely prejudiced perspective on sort of dehumanizing black people, and so you didn't get that, and so they wouldn't let people speak, and so on and so forth. It's why you continued up until like the 80s, etc. No Irish, no blacks in the pubs, that sort of thing. And you just go, yeah, that's prejudice right there. And so the idea that you are able today to earn millions of pounds speaking in an activist discipline effectively, and then claim that you're so oppressed is ridiculous. It's like people going on about what did I know it's a bit off topic, but like, what did Christine Ford have to gain by attacking Brett Kavanaugh, etc.? She was traumatic for her, etc.
Well,
It's
$1
like,
million.
she made over $1 million. She got a book deal, and she's cemented her place, as it were, like as a person beyond reproach in her discipline. Because if anyone attacks her, they know how far she could take it.
She's now got the boss card, hasn't she, for the victimology game? She can always produce that card and claim victimhood. That's the thing.
Oh yes, there was this thing as well that's just come out. So this Elizabeth Warren has taken a DNA test and find strong evidence of Native American blood, which the chat says is 1 in 1,024th.
Yeah, it would be about 1024. Yeah, that sounds about right. That would be 10th.
It kind of depends how far back you go. I mean,
that would be the 10th
because it gives a scope of how many generations removed she is supposed to be. So if you go to the furthest generation removed, then more than likely she has got something ridiculous like that.
Oh yes.
I mean, I heard someone say that. When I first heard of this story, it was through a tweet where someone said, "Oh well, 3%, might be her DNA." So you do kind of think, yeah, the moniker Pocahontas isn't going to leave her anytime soon.
The thing, if you're gonna claim hereditary smarty points, you'd have to go for the Welsh heritage, wouldn't you?
Will you please explain how or why?
Yeah, because that's what you do,
Joe
if you're in Wales, you mean, because you're the poor sod speaking Welsh whom no one can understand, and you're in the middle of Cardiff.
Abraham Lincoln was Welsh heritage.
Look, no one.
Well, I also believe Harry Morgan was Welsh.
Well, he would be with a name like Morgan, wouldn't he?
No one would breed with the Welsh except the Welsh, and you know it. Joe Neverton says they didn't even test for Native American here. They tested for Mexican ancestry. So she's not that. After Trump called her a fake Pocahontas.
No, I don't think I could be wrong. I don't think he's ever called her fake Pocahontas. I think he just basically referred to her as Pocahontas.
I have no idea. Again, they've put it in quotes and not linked to it, so I assume.
Yeah, I believe I recall he did refer to her as Pocahontas once, which was obviously mocking, as in, a representative with the Indian blood in her, who's blonde haired and white, but to look at her, it's a bizarre claim to make if you look like Elizabeth Warren.
I think in one of the tweets, somebody mentioned that in her CV, when she went to, I think she went to Harvard, one of the Ivy League universities, she claimed to be a person of color. She's always claimed to be on the minority side.
Of course.
Yeah,
it gives her extra brownie points.
Yeah,
but apparently between 1 in 32 and 1 in 512, like of any minority, whatever she wants, she could be anywhere between a 32nd and a 512th of it. I mean, it's not difficult to find one ancestor, is it? Like, of anything. We're a pretty diverse group genetically.
Well, the problem is in genetics, if you've gone past 3 generations and you're a pure breed or purebred, that's all it takes is 3 generations. So,
I mean, with that program, Who Do You Think You Are? I mean, I've never really watched it myself, but I've heard of sort of various surprising results where particularly people who see themselves as black are very, very surprised and quite upset at times when it then turns out that, a few generations back, one of their ancestors was a plantation owner.
Yes.
They it doesn't chime well.
It is, yeah. I find it quite amusing because you just go, we're so far removed from that world. It really shouldn't upset you. And the world was a different place.
This is just it. I think most people of white heritage would be quite comfortable with the knowledge that, okay, if you go far enough back in history,
someone somewhere,
serfs.
Yes. Or someone somewhere did something bad.
We're more than likely all serfs, and we were downtrodden and picked upon by some noble class who basically were all nobles because, their ancestors once upon a time had stolen some sheep with the king. And now basically they were in a position whereby they could just clobber anybody they want and rape anyone's daughter they wanted. And I think in sort of white heritage, we've kind of long ago come to terms with the fact that, yeah, we're more than likely all descended from the kind of losers of history, if you know what I mean. How many of us can really sort of truly believe that we're descended from, 12th century nobility?
Well, we was kangs.
Well, the point, white people very rarely play the victim card, do they? So they don't care, basically. But if you're in that sort of mindset, then it would matter, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, I saw a documentary once, where Americans were taken to one of the forts in sort of West Africa, where the slave ships set sail from. And it came as a massive shock to some of the the black Americans, to kind of realize that it was blacks at that end that had been capturing and trading the slaves.
Well, that's history, isn't it?
And I actually saw one black chap actually stand there and bang his fist against one of the columns of the building in sort of abject, he really was struggling to come to terms with the fact that this mythology that had been built up is, it was all the crimes of the white man. And that suddenly then this whole constructs come crashing down when you suddenly realize, hang on a moment, the people who originally enslaved your ancestors were other black people who then sold them for money.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the white people exploited the system. They didn't invent it.
Yeah.
Yes, the idea that there was more than just the slave triangle.
And the thing is, I think the first international treaty signed by the US was in relation to the Barbary slavers, wasn't it?
I have no idea.
Yeah, they needed to stop the Barbary Coast pirates taking slaves because they were stopping American ships and taking
from taking slaves.
Yeah, which didn't go down too well.
Well,
and I think that was the first international treaties that they came to.
The track record on a lot of, I'm not justifying slavery here, but the track record on the way that slaves were treated, in West compared to, say, the Middle East, where rampant sexual slavery was like a massive thing and stuff like that. I'm just going.
Well, I mean, you don't even have to go that far. I mean, I read something once that slave ship owners, the earliest slave ship owners that arrived in West Africa to kind of buy slaves, they actually had to persuade the sellers to please treat the slaves better. Basically, because they said, look,
we want them healthy. Yes,
if you batter the living daylights out of them before we get to buy them off you, they're less likely to survive the journey over the Atlantic. And of course, because a lot of these captives were effectively prisoners taken in war or whatever, they were the enemy to those people.
Mm.
So therefore, there was not a lot of love lost.
No, I
So,
can imagine.
in a way, in a bizarre way, the welfare for the slaves that were being penned in there eventually to be sold to white slavers, that welfare actually went up precisely due to slavery. Now, I know this is it sounds like someone trying to strenuously produce a positive point out of it, which is hardly what I'm trying to do here. This is just a matter of historical record. These are the things that happened.
Yes,
And
it was. They were going to be slaves anyway.
What you need to understand is that slavery as such was an ancient solution to what do you do with the prisoners.
Yes.
Because prior to that, the solution had simply been kill them all.
Which is problematic because there's a lot of work to get rid of them all.
So essentially, slavery was the ancient world's humanitarianism. I know this sounds bizarre. And we have to understand that when we are then looking at sort of, 18th, 17th, 18th century slavery, you are kind of looking at the continuation of the traditions from back then.
Mm.
It began grinding and grinding ever more with an increasingly modern society. And therefore, eventually, it was stopped. But one always needs to understand that the world would have continued on merrily with slavery had it not been for some European countries, chiefest of all, dare I say it, Great Britain, to come to the conclusion this is really something that is unacceptable in our day and age.
It's something you're really quite proud of, isn't it? Abolishing slavery, Britisher.
Well, I think it's definitely one of the sort of good marks in our book, isn't it? I mean,
was it a good day in your diary?
Yes, yeah. It's a day on which I always have a fourth biscuit. Yes,
I understand you had to fake your death about 3 weeks after abolishing, but I'm sure that it was a good victory for you.
Yes.
The thing is, the British Empire always gets the blame for slave trading and slavery, and
it's BS.
There's an element of truth to that, is that they were exploited, or they were exploiting the slave trade, but the British never invented slavery, and we did end it.
Mm. Yeah, you're the ones to finally click that it was probably a bad idea.
Well, we then actively went about making it impossible. I mean, we actually hunted the slave ships.
One of the benefits of having an empire at the time.
Well, it's it gets even more ridiculous that when it then comes to our attacks on the West African coast, on those forts, on those slave trading kingdoms, when we told them you can't do any slave trade anymore, you can imagine they weren't best pleased. And they would then just go ahead and continue to trade anyway. So eventually the Brits started launching kind of attacks on those stations and on those kingdoms. And guess what? We are then now, ex post facto, accused of, imperialist aggression for attacking those places.
Yes.
Even though the very reason we attacked them in the first place is to stop the slavery.
Yes.
So it really is one of those, you cannot win situations.
We did have it's really interesting to look at the development of why, the context of why places were attacked, and even up to really local, as in recent history, when it comes to the role of just taking the last century or so, the role of the Western nations in particular in why that they have gone to different places. So obviously in colonial times, etc., it was to piss off the French. I mean, to ensure that the French didn't control all of Africa. And nowadays it was this thing where it used to just be what went on in your country you kept to yourself. So unless it was directly affecting you personally, the countries stayed out of each other's business, which is why I guess like so many tyrannical regimes just get left. or used to just get left. And then you had this whole thing where, oh, we have the power to be the moral police. And do we have a responsibility to intercede on the behalf of people in order to in order to raise standards of living, to bring democracy, shall we say? And it's interesting because you look at things like that with because that was one of the chief reasons behind, say, the 03 Iraq War, as much as anything else. One of the justifications that they gave was we have a duty to help these people, alongside the fact that they may have WMDs, and also there's quite a lot of oil there, and also we don't quite like what
I
Saddam's
remember
doing.
when that kicked off, or was it the Second War? Starsky, the historian, got into a bit of trouble on Question Time because he turned around and he said, look, he said, you can't give people democracy. They need to want democracy. Yeah, you can't just turn up to a country and say, here's the democracy, get on with it.
Oh, you can.
You
but
can.
It takes a very particular kind of thing. Basically, history proves that you can give them democracy if you bomb them almost back to the Stone Age.
All right.
I mean, look at the Second World War. The Germans were turned democratic, and so were the Japanese. But look how much pain you needed to inflict upon them before you were able to say, right, now we start dictating terms.
Yeah. Okay, the Japanese would have been a good example of that. The Germans were democracy before Hitler's rise to power, right?
Well, yes, but I mean, only just. I mean, the Weimar Republic, succeeded the Kaiser and was never liked because, in a way, one saw it as weak compared to the times one had under the Kaiser.
Yeah.
So
it wasn't a well-established tradition, I'll give you that.
In a way, we kind of, we were able to kind of give them, or preferably impose democracy, simply because they were bombed, to their knees. And you think, unless you are willing to do that to another nation, you aren't really able to then, bring democracy to them, because they'll just look at it and go, okay, so how do we corrupt this?
It's I did a video on colonialism called "The Right to Publish," and the video was in relation to the American academic, who got into hot water because he didn't defend colonialism, but he offered the proposition that it wasn't necessarily all a bad thing.
Which is unspeakable. Which is, of course, why I'm such a popular figure with some of the people on the left, because I basically indeed defend colonialism. I don't think at all it was something that we kind of have to poo-poo and kind of treat with kid gloves. There were reasons why we had colonialism, and the idea that it was just exploitation is ridiculous.
Ludicrous. Did you do a thing this week on the week that was, because I haven't watched it yet, I'm sorry, about the Jeremy Corbyn wanting to change the education system?
No, I didn't do anything about that. But I must say I am somewhat shocked. And Shinobi, you see, now that he's got a clip with 30,000 hits, suddenly he thinks he's too good to watch other people.
That's not what it is. I just haven't had the time.
It's all coming out now, isn't it? It's all.
I've been having to read a bloody SPSS statistics and research methods textbook. Just leave me be.
He's not going to deign to watch your channel, so he's up there with the Sargonites, mind.
Singing with the angels now. That's what it is.
Right, this Corbyn thing, does it involve camps in any sort of form?
No, but it does.
Does it involve barbed wire?
I wish it did. He basically was talking about Black History Month, and he was saying it's a tragedy that Black history is constrained to a single month, which is something which the Conservatives have been saying, or the right wing have been saying for a while. All you have to do is look at someone like particularly the right wing Black population in America. You take someone like Morgan Freeman, who is basically like, years ago in a famous interview where he said, I'm going to stop calling you a white man. I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man, and we'll just get on. And that'll end racism. That right there. And don't constrain Black History Month to a single month.
Was that the same interview? I'm not sure, but in one interview I remember with Morgan Freeman, when he was asked, what should we do about racism and whatever, and he just looked straight at the interviewer and said, "Stop whining about it."
Yeah, basically, we stopped talking about it. Same interview, and then he was talking about. He said it's insulting to have Black History Month. Would you like your history confined to a single month? My history is my history. It's American history. It's world history. It doesn't need to be confined, and the important points from it should bleed through.
Sorry, go ahead.
Now that's an interesting, it's a very utopian statement, because obviously every single culture on Earth will prioritize different figures from its own personal history. But that's not to say that specifically black figures are being excluded on purpose.
But the problem is, when I was in school, and probably Britisher, I would have thought, we did 1066 and all that.
Yes, I did it. I did 1066. I'm not that far removed, thank you.
Oh, okay, then that's fine. But now they just seem to you're lucky if they cover the Second World War.
I didn't do 1066.
You were raised
there. I didn't need to do it.
Oh, of course. And you were obviously raised on the continent, and therefore definitely didn't learn about 1066.
But yes, 1066 wasn't necessarily on the curriculum. Yes.
No.
Mind you, when it comes to 1066, of course, I was part of the cavalry charge. No, that sort of reminds me of that wonderful story around, what was that film? I think it might have just been called Alexander. I'm not sure. In which they actually they contacted this historian who had written several books on Alexander the Great and on the army and the culture of the time and everything. They basically asked him, would you mind being a consultant for this great Hollywood production that we're planning to do? And he sort of said, yeah, he would be quite up to it and whatever. But they kind of completely forgot to kind of talk about, pay. So eventually they got back in touch with him and sort of said, well, look, what would you want for it? And he said, no, I don't want anything. I've only got one condition. I want to be part of the cavalry charge. So somewhere in the cavalry charge in the movie, in the Battle of Gaugamela, when the cavalry charges, somewhere in there is he as one of the extras on the horses. Yes.
Oh, excellent!
Amazing.
So he didn't get a penny. He just basically wanted to be one of the extras on the horses in that. And he said he deliberately went through training and whatever, being able to ride, because they rode without stirrups back then and whatever. So obviously, if you want to be in the cavalry charge in something like that, you have to know how to handle yourself and a horse.
I tell you a channel you want to watch. I think you know the guy, Britisher, is Lindy Beige.
Oh yes,
Lindy Beige. How can I not know Lindy?
Also known as the Britishers' Bane.
Yes. Well, yes, it's most disconcerting, as I said in a comment on one of Lindy Beige, or it might even be his latest video. It's definitely one of his most recent videos in which he goes through British officers' kit. And he basically decided that in order to sell some merchandise, he needed to, set himself up in sort of British officers' kit and have some photos taken, and like that, one could sort of work out some merchandise with it. So obviously, with the name Lindy Beige, he sort of thought, the khaki was ideal. So he set himself up in a sort of, British officer's tunic, and he's got a pith helmet and everything. Swagger stick, the lot. But he set himself up as a colonel, which means he now outranks me.
I tell you what, I've never watched a Lindy Beige video. I'll get him on next week. Because I know you've been trying for so long to get him on.
He runs a very interesting channel. I got to be honest.
He's one of the most interesting channels out there. Because in one moment it can be sort of quite scholarly and sort of going through historical detail and whatever, and the next moment he can be in a paintball battle in tanks. And in that regard, yes, you do have to take your hat off to him. He has created something very special.
I love it.
And, I have been kind of exchanging a few emails with Mr. Lindy Beige, and I'm still kind of keeping my fingers crossed that one day I might be able to get him on.
I hope so.
So we'll just kind of have to sort of keep our fingers crossed and see what happens there.
He's obviously a history buff, isn't he? I think he's qualified.
Yes, he's very much a history buff, indeed. But you can understand that the bigger your channel gets, the more communication you get.
Yeah.
And, in that regard, I realize it myself already, as in, how much more I have than I previously did, when, let's say, I had 3,000 or something like that. Now, when you look at Lindy Beige, he's got something like 700,000, I believe. That's his sub number. So, yes, he must get inundated all the time. So I think it's almost a kind of battle to stay sane for Mr. Lindy Beige. But no, he's definitely he's definitely up there as one of the best, I would say.
Now I have one more article for us this evening, which I'm sure we'll go through, and this one is another strange one from the political sphere. So there's been another plane mutiny. Do you remember the girl who stood up and refused to allow the man to be deported?
Oh yes,
on the plane.
She was charged. She's been charged since, hasn't she?
Has she?
Yes.
Amazing. She should be. And he was also wanted for murder, I believe,
Yes,
which is why he was
turned out
doing
he wasn't a particularly nice man. Yes.
So there was a similar thing which happened in the UK. A Somali man whose deportation from the UK was stopped by plane passengers. Turns out he was on his way back because he'd raped a 16-year-old girl in London, and his mate had also gone on to fight for ISIS, and he was in contact with him still. Passengers complained because he was being separated from his family in the UK. And yes, so airline passengers staged a mutiny demanding his release. And he's been exposed today as a convicted gang rapist being kicked out the country because of his crime. Yaqub Ahmed, on a flight from Heathrow to Turkey, they were forced to abandon his deportation when a dozen holidaymakers who felt sorry for him angrily intervened. One person was heard declaring, "You're free, man." You can only imagine what he feels like now. They're separating him from his family. Others chanted, "Take him off the plane."
These people should be ashamed of themselves.
And he was seen.
Do they honestly think that we are deporting people for nothing just because we feel like it?
Oh, it's a Windrush thing now, isn't it? Like they go, "Oh, it must be." Oh, you feel sorry for him. I mean, look at that face.
Yes, but if you look at that face, that is a very, very young-looking face.
Yes,
you can imagine how someone quite as young and innocent-looking as that could kind of do those kind of angel eyes looking up at people in complete sorrow.
Funnily enough, I imagine there's not a specific way that a gang rapist talks, So, and you go, you can understand why he would talk like he's probably quite a mellow chap, and he's probably just talking to people. And when they explained that was going on, so the passengers who thought they were doing good deed were unaware that he'd been part of the gang rape. And another, apart from the guilt by association thing, but another member of his gang fought for IS.
There's this rush, isn't there, to be virtuous?
Yeah. But not just to be virtuous.
It's strange that rush exists to be virtuous. If it's a matter of someone like that on a plane. But there have been other examples, where we've extradited people to the United States of America that should never have happened.
Yeah,
and funnily enough, all that virtue signaling doesn't exist then. I mean, wasn't there? I'm trying to remember. There were 2 or 3 people who were basically investment managers of NatWest, who were extradited to the USA. This just comes to mind, because you were sort of saying, well, do we think we extradite people for nothing? In that particular case, there was I think this was sometime after the credit crunch. I could be misremembering things here, so forgive me.
Yeah, I remember that case
But
vaguely.
I remember specifically NatWest wasn't pressing any charges against them. They didn't feel that they had lost any money through these people.
Mm.
And yet the American authorities wanted them for sort of fraud / embezzlement / some sort of illegal enrichment, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
Even though their victims, namely NatWest, didn't feel aggrieved.
They didn't care.
And this was something that was supposed to have happened in Britain because, you know, this is where they were situated. This is where they had done their work.
And that's where the jurisdiction was.
Sent them to America under some, you know, legalistic phrasing that in some cases, for greater ease, it is possible for greater court cases to draw in people.
Well, we've got an extradition treaty with the US, haven't we? So that
well, yes, but apparently the reasoning had been because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to send these people, even with an extradition treaty. Wouldn't have been able to send these people because they were accused of having committed a crime in Britain.
Ah, I see. So our courts were responsible for them.
So effectively, we were sending it over there because there was some sort of legalistic explanation that because it was part of a greater trial of other trials taking, you know, other things being looked at in that trial, we would kind of allow the Americans to tag this on.
How strange.
Yeah, I mean,
going back to the like the idea of this sort of a chap's calling it pathological altruism, and this idea that this drive to be virtuous, I think it's because there's no cost associated. There is absolutely no cost associated. If you look at, to me, when protests died properly, although I make arguments that protest has never really been that effective, unless you're talking about mass strikes, for instance, then like I'd say probably the Million March against the Iraq War was when an entire generation became disillusioned overnight. So you're right there. But the idea that, I mean, protest historically has always had a cost because you needed to work to eat. If you didn't work, you didn't eat. And if you were taking time off to protest, then you were struggling, or you were very wealthy, and therefore, you know, it didn't really matter to you. And there was a social cost as well, where you were disrupting the status quo. And if you were striking from work, for instance, you were doing some serious damage to either local or national economy, and therefore there was a cost involved societally and socially for you, because you were probably damaging your own life. And that was what the seriousness of it was about, was you were willing to risk your own livelihood, your own the local lives of yourself and those around you, your family, for instance, who you may not be able to support, for the sake of a message that you needed to get through. Whereas now it's you know, it's just it's people on laptops mainly. But
so
also,
what you're saying is there should have been a cost attributable to it.
Yes,
I think what I mean is which could have easily have been done. Because one could simply have said to those people, all right, we will leave him here. But all of you who want him to stay here with him.
I don't know about that.
So no, simply as in, you know, basically, so if you want to have your flight, then yeah, fine. But then he stays on it. If you are willing to sacrifice your flight to keep this man here,
I'm sure there's a law against disrupting the normal operation of aircraft in an airport.
It's so tightly controlled, all the scheduling.
I mean, it must be one of the most tightly controlled spaces there is, really, if you think of it.
Yes. Trust me. So, yes.
They could have said, look, he's staying, but you guys can go if you want. Yeah, but the thing is, it's fast, isn't it, to bother?
Well, no, but you understand what I mean when I say, well, we'll leave him here if you know, if those people demanding he stays here, so including the chap saying you're free, man, if those people are then also left at the same airport, so basically, at that moment you would attribute a cost to it. and then it would be interesting to see how quickly everybody fell silent.
Well, it's more akin to you'll be put on a blacklist and you will never be allowed to fly on this airline, or something to that effect.
I'd agree with that.
They say something along, you're disrupting air traffic and illegal transportation of a prisoner for deportation.
Yeah.
Therefore, you would never be admitted on whatever it is, British Airlines ever again.
There we go.
And you go, and it's that, and you go, that's the cost. And if they go, okay, that's fine.
See, I mean, the problem simply was that the poor man had never watched Midnight Run, because otherwise, if he would have seen that, he would have known how to get out of being flown somewhere. Just fake a panic attack.
Indeed. They could have removed them all from the flight and then just arrested them there and there. It's just.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that not one of them passengers probably asked the escorting staff or the custody officers, what has he actually done?
Oh, they're not allowed to know. It's something like that is considered to be sensitive, and you're not allowed to say, unfortunately. So it's not quite as simple as that, and sometimes the escorting officers don't even know what he's done. They just know that they have to escort him. That's
right. Okay.
Because it's all confidentiality, particularly if it's an ongoing case, and sometimes the case can be considered ongoing until he is put down in the country they deport him to, and then as soon as he's handed over, it's considered to be free. The case is closed. He's away. So that ends up being the way it is. That's just all it is. But yeah, it's he doesn't get deported. He turns out to be a gang rapist. The virtue signalers, they haven't paid a cost for what they've done. I'm sure they'll freak out a little bit. Maybe it will give us some of them pause for thought. But
are they that bright, though? That's the thing.
But they won't be like, it's not like they're going to be named and shamed or anything like that. Not that I would advocate doing so either. It just doesn't. They will see no practical cost for their actions. Liberal Zardos says, do you guys think it might be more practical to transport these people privately or on army flights in future?
I think that would more than likely prove prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, that's the main thing. If you're talking about military flights, they tend to be quite, again, heavily scheduled. Because of the types of aircraft they are, they're not necessarily the most efficient vehicles. So that gets very expensive that way. And soldiers don't really want to be spending time with criminals, particularly the kinds of people who are being deported. Like, because the kinds of people being deported are, as you say, wanted for murder or rape or terrorism charges or whatever. So you don't really want to transport terrorists alongside your, men in uniform, men and women in uniform, particularly when that person could memorize the faces of squaddies and all sorts. Who knows? It's just a bit dodgy to me to do that.
Perhaps we should get one of them, like in the Victorian times, they had prison ships, didn't they? Just pop them on a ship.
Make them all galley slaves. That's what we just have in the beginning. Row or die. There you go.
Big drummer in the front. That's it.
But there was
you don't care how long it takes to get there.
Those were prison hulks, where basically one had taken the masts down, but the ship was still afloat.
Oh, yes, that's right.
So one just basically anchored it somewhere in a harbour.
Yeah. They had a few in London because they run out of prison space in London at one time, and then they had all these prison hulks.
Yes, that sounds. That's. I remember even. Was this at the time of Michael Howard? I'm not sure, when they were desperately trying to build their way out of.
They brought it back, didn't they?
Yes.
And they hired this boat and they converted it into sort of like a floating prison.
Because they desperately needed to build more prisons at a very short notice, because Michael Howard had locked up that many people. It's remarkable that, as I say, when he left office, when Labour took over, that they had reached 55,000. And that was believed to be stellar, that was astronomical. Whereas now we're somewhere at 85,000, thanks to Labour. Yes, just basically. I even remember Jack Straw, the man whose glasses started getting smaller and smaller and smaller until he started resembling Mr. Himmler Well, yeah, he obviously must have thought, oh, as a Home Secretary, I must look tough. So his glasses that were actually quite broad and wide, started getting smaller and smaller models until he had these sort of tiny little, round little glasses that made him look mean and stern, if you know what I mean.
Oh dear.
So yes, that's the model of Labour Home Secretary, if you know what I mean. So the one thing to avoid at all cost.
My God,
And I remember him announcing how another prison building program was taking place, and that he was proud to announce that the prison capacity would now be rising to 99,000.
Mm.
And please imagine that, if you were someone announcing that you need to build more prison places and whatever, you would sort of say, well, reluctantly or something like that. But no. He was a man beaming with pride saying, oh, I am proud to announce it's going to go up to 99,000 now.
Mm.
Yeah, it's an odd thing that Labour, you would think that the party who would introduce the most legislation, criminalise the most people, would be the Conservatives, because you would expect that from a right-leaning or political movement. But it's actually Labour who introduces
they went
the most.
berserk. They went absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's odd.
I remember they somewhere I read once that sort of throughout the Victorian age or whatever, there was once every blue moon there was a Home Office bill whereby new law and order came forward, because one sort of realised, okay, something has times has moved on, or certain crimes have come to the fore, so we need to pass some laws here, and so it kind of happened sort of once every 50 or 25 years. And then obviously in the 20th century, things started speeding up. But by the time it came to the Labour government from 1997 onwards, they were having a Home Office bill every 6 months, which kind of gave you an idea. They were passing something like a law once a day. The amount of statutes that were coming out. It was ridiculous.
It was something like every 5 hours, I believe.
And if you and therefore, if you create that much more crime, on the statutes, you create criminals. And this is one of the things that they seem to just be unwilling to realize, the politicians. Every single time you pass a new law, you are actually locking people up.
Yes, to the tune of £35,000 a year.
Yeah. And therefore, when you go from 55,000 to 82,500, as Labour did in 13 years, it's just an incredible increase.
That's the thing. I mean, I think I've seen it on the news this week that there was 3,000 police inquiries into hate speech on social media.
Yeah,
3,000. Now, how many of them went to court? We don't know, but that's a lot of people, isn't it?
Yes, the amount of money we are throwing away on police doing nonsense laws, and we've been increasing it year in, year out, and it's very, very difficult to interest the public in it.
Yes.
It's almost as if at some point the pain level needs to get so high, or everybody needs to have at least a cousin who has been affected by it, if you know what I mean. And then things start turning.
Well, that's right. When it starts to affect family members and people they know, the coin might drop then.
Because it's kind of ridiculous what has happened over the past 20 years or more. And yeah, you hear these, reports sometimes on the BBC or something like that, where they're talking about how prisons are just spiraling out of control, and how they're really struggling to hang on to their prison guards, because the prison guards are just basically saying, look, we can't cope. I mean,
no, I had a friend who was a prison guard, and he is, or was, one of the strongest people I knew, and he attempted suicide after 6 months in the job because it was so horrendous.
Yeah, it's just hell on earth. You open the gates of hell every day you go to work.
They were talking about how it was, in terms of officer provision, it was one officer for 200 to 400 prisoners. Can you imagine what you do when you walk down a corridor with 200 people on it and you're expected to keep law and order? Like all you've got is your little stick.
It's absolutely insane what's going on, and that
these
is
are not
because
normal
we're
people.
still
These are
trying
criminals.
to run the prison system on the cheap, but we're piling more and more and more people in, and it just doesn't work. You look at this and you just sort of think, well, either you have to really throw a serious amount of funding at it in order to make this work, or you have got to concede that you have to stop locking people up for nonsense. I mean, what was he called? Jeffrey Archer. I mean, he was a high-flying Tory, and then he was done for perjury.
Mm.
And there was another chap whose name I forget, who held an unbelievably pretentious speech about fighting the press with the sword of, what was it? The sword of righteousness and the shield of truth, or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I believe he was a Tory cabinet minister who fell very low. Again, I think he was done for perjury. But the thing was, both of them were kind of useless before they went to prison. But once they came out of prison, they seemed to actually to have turned into sort of more rounded human beings, if you know what I mean. It was as if they kind of realized, oh, so this is the kind of stuff that goes on in the real world.
It was character building. That's what you're craving.
Well, no, it's sort of suddenly they realize the cost of some of their prejudice and sort of this attitude, this haughty attitude of, oh, lock them up and throw away the key. Once they were suddenly one of those people being locked up and the key being thrown away, once they were suddenly a number, they suddenly kind of realized, hang on a moment, this is madness. And both of them came out, and both of them said almost the exact thing when they came out. A, what are all these people doing in there? And secondly, why are we locking up so many people with mental issues and whatever?
That's
And
the problem, isn't it?
all of them, both of them were saying the same thing. Just about everybody they spoke to couldn't properly read and write. Well, if they can't read and write, what are we expecting them to do other than to turn the crime? Huge amount of them had mental issues and whatever. And as I say, both of them said straight out, most of those people who were in there shouldn't be in there.
Yeah.
And that's the bizarre thing that, I think you will find sort of most serious people who kind of talk of prison reform and the reform of the law and whatever. None of us are really sort of saying we shouldn't have prisons. We shouldn't be locking up the rapists. We shouldn't be locking up the pedophiles. That is what's always thrown in our face by the other side.
Yeah.
But the simple truth is, if you look at it, there are a huge number of people in there who are in there for just petty stuff that you sort of think, I'm sorry, but how did this person ever end up in prison in the first place? I mean, I remember in the 80s, there was a series of prison riots when the prisoners all ended up on prison roofs throwing the tiles off the roofs. It kind of made international news back then. And, reports came out about some of the reasons people were in, high security prison.
Yeah.
And one of them was there for his latest crime had been stealing a bicycle.
Oh, good.
And you just sort of think, really? It's that sort of stuff that you sort of feel, I'm sorry, we are really, we seem to be locking up people for nonsense. I mean, now you can go to prison for telling the wrong joke.
Yep.
And we just have to ask ourselves, what is prison for? And it's primarily there to protect society from the really dangerous people we really don't want out here.
Yeah.
People telling jokes don't really fall onto that category.
Under that category, no. Oh, it would, according to the far left. But Ladon in chat says privatize the prisons. And all I can think of when people say that every time is Death Race. Are you aware of Death Race? Oh, Shinobi has seen it, of course.
Yeah.
Jason Statham being sent to a for-profit prison, being forced to.
Yes, they race on this track that can change. Yes, I believe I've seen that one. Yes,
it's quite brutal and it's hilarious because it's so wacky. It's brutal, but it's silly brutal. You know what I mean? It's so surreal. that it defies
It has a sort of
expectation.
Mad Max flavor to it.
A little bit. I mean, when a man with a car which is more Gatling gun than vehicle swings around to a man who's been crushed on some giant spikes, who crawls out and yells something along the lines of "You can't kill me," and then basically opens his door as he's going along the way past, so that he can knock the guy into a dozen pieces. It's just ridiculous. But it's well worth a watch if you're interested in a silly Jason Statham smacking people about in a mechanic's uniform. Yeah. Liberal Zardo says I prefer The Running Man myself. Also a good film, complete with stupid and ridiculous costumes. Particularly that electric man. I can't remember his name. Where he's basically wearing a spandex suit with bobbles on.
Oh, spandex.
But there you go. Original Sly Stallone Death Race better. I mean, I haven't seen that one, so I can't say.
No, I can't say I've seen a Sly Stallone version of that. No.
Apparently, there's there's a sequel to Death Race, which is made by a different director with a completely different cast at a completely different budget.
This is the high quality, high budget
Right.
sequel.
So Death Race, the high quality, high budget blockbuster, which was then abandoned, but the intellectual property was sold to some tiny studio who's made like this really, really awful knockoff version. With
the cars are actually sort of Hot Wheels cars.
Well, I imagine they managed to get a little bit more budget than the average B movie because the of the legacy of the name and so on and who's connected to it. But the fact was they couldn't get anyone with any kind of star power connected to it. No director would take it apart from these other people. Anyway.
But Death Race was a pretty crappy film anyway, wasn't it? Let's be honest.
No, please. It's a crappy. It's great in the way that crappy films can be great when you don't want to think. You just want to watch a silly thing.
You're saying it was so crappy, it was enjoyable.
Basically,
I think the key ingredient there is always that a film like that should never take itself too seriously.
Absolutely.
If in a way the people know it, if everyone involved in making the movie in a way knows that it's just a piece of sort of action junk, then that's fine. It's when films like that start taking on a sort of pretentious air, that's when you sort of think, oh, good God, please go away.
You know how most things in society are cyclical. I'm waiting for the return of one-liners. Basically, like the Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of, he had to let off some steam. That sort of thing.
Have you been practicing your Arnold Schwarzenegger impression?
9.
Or when Sean Connery knocks the electric fan into the bath.
When Sean Connery.
When the enemy agent has eventually succumbed, he just goes, shocking.
Yes, I'm waiting for the return of that. It'd be awful, but it'd be great at the same time. It's oh dear.
They were classic films, though.
Oh yeah, they're still enjoyable today. Like for all the wrong reasons. Like True Lies is a funny film. Like regardless of the context and the era that it's in.
Oh yes, isn't when Schwarzenegger jumps into a jump jet in order to sort of take off with it, and his colleague sort of looks at him and goes, be serious. You haven't flown one of these things for 20 years. And he goes, well, if I break it, take it out of my salary. And takes off with it.
Yes, yeah, it takes off. Or, I love something like he rolls down a hill and ends up fighting a Marine who starts going off about how much of a Green Beret he is and how he's going to beat him. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger replies, I eat Green Berets for breakfast and I'm hungry. And it's just, of course, they've smashed their way through a wall, and there's a young couple who've been copulating on the bed, who are there basically hastily trying to cover themselves as these two enormous men beat each other up in front of them, and they're yelling all these things, and the woman just standing there, stark as going, "Oh, stop with the macho bullshit!" And it's just such a moment of self-awareness. It's just brilliant. Oh, I love it. Oh dear. Anyway, on that note, it is time to end. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in, and thank you once again to my guests. Thank you, Britisher.
Well, thank you very much for having us. I mean, we know we're now just puny little minions now that you've reached clips with 31,000 viewers.
After you
But
talk,
it's nice for you to sort of, have us nonetheless.
after you talked about how small you felt at 3,500 subscribers just a minute ago, Mr. Ego. Thank you very much for coming, Shinobi. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Mention the 30,000.
Don't mention the 30,000. Don't mention the 30,000. Good night, chat. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all your comments. Really enjoyed it.
Pip.
Take care. Goodbye.